Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. Before we get into it with our guest here today, I'd like to remind everyone if you enjoy this content to please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Bailey Harrison on the podcast. She's coming to us all the way from Washington. And yeah, she's on here to just share her health and fitness journey and discuss all things health and fitness. But most importantly, she's our current guest. Bailey, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I got to play devil's advocate first off. What's the weather like today in Washington?
Actually, today is really sunny. We're probably getting closer to high 80s, low 90s.
It's like around what it is here, so hey, it's not too bad. I mean, it wasn't like the people that I talked to yesterday. They're in Dallas, where it's like 108 even today, and it was like that yesterday. And I don't understand how those people can live like that. They're freaks. I tell them that to their face because I just wanted to let them know that just how abnormal they are. But before we get into all that, to get things started, Bailey, why don't you just first off give us your backstory on what inspired and motivated you to lead this journey?
Yeah, so I played sports through high school. And then when I went to college, I actually ended up being a nanny for a family whose the mom was into bodybuilding. And so I kind of got to watch her journey to the stage and go to the show with her. And the minute I went to the show, it was like, yep, I want to do that. So after that, she actually ended up like coaching me for my first couple shows, and immediately fell in love with the sport. I did take a step away for a couple years and did some powerlifting, but then came back in 2020 and switched to the bikini division, and really kind of took it hard from there.
Did you have any reservations at all about the sport? Because so many people, I mean, even though you went to a show and you said, "Wow, this looks amazing," there's so many myths out there in the general public about the sport that it's hard for so many people when they first get started to just know what's what, really.
Yeah, so it definitely. I think more of my reservations came from I was the last couple years of high school, I really struggled with like being underweight and not eating, kind of more on like the anorexia side. So I think more of my concerns were in regard to like, is this going to bring a lot of like those triggers back? When in reality, it probably helped me because like you can't step on stage and just be skinny, right? Like you have to have the muscle. And so I think that it kind of pushed me to be healthier in that sense and really like enjoy the building season and work to gain the muscle and almost kind of look at it from a different perspective of like, yes, you want to get lean for stage, but you also want your stage weight to be higher, right? So that you have more muscle. So
I'm not gonna lie, the first time that I heard, because a lot of the guests that I've talked to do come from an eating disorder background, where they, I was just shocked the first time they announced that, like, oh yeah, then I wanted to do competitives, and I was like, that doesn't sound like it's that good of a combination, but it's worked out for so many of them. Like from the outside, I was always just thinking like that's just really weird. But I mean, hey, it works because I've always thought like, oh, going back to sort of like that extreme, especially with the diet. But I mean, just the discipline alone that the sport entails is just probably the most impressive thing to me. But this is also so much more of a mental journey than it is a physical journey. And I mean, so many people just notice the physical changes because that's the only thing that they can really see. They don't really, get to be inside of you and realize that, like all this that stuff that's happened mentally. But what has this journey been like for you mentally?
I would say that it definitely like even as like a seasoned competitor, you still have your ups and downs, right? Like even though you've been through like a reverse in a building and then into prep, like you still struggle in the reverse, seeing yourself gain body fat and kind of have to talk yourself through that. And then like on the opposite side, when you're in prep, like just being like super hungry and tired. And I think that each time you kind of go through those phases, you kind of pick up different mental strengths and tools to kind of make it easier each time, but you still have those battles.
And I mean, I also love to talk genetics on this podcast too, because unfortunately, some people are just born with it and some people are just born without it. But I always love to ask because whenever someone first gets started working out, they have that one body part that really, really takes off. They don't have to train as much. And they have that one body part that just had to drag behind. They have to train to oblivion. What was one body part that really took off for you? And what's been one body part that you just had to drag behind?
So I would say shoulders. Like that was like the first thing that I noticed, and like even now, like it's not something that we need to grow in to be competitive as a pro, but my glutes were what really lagged behind. And that's still been a battle, like, and a feedback, just like every time, like, you need more glute depth, you need more glute density. And so, like, it's definitely improved, but there's still, like, we're still pushing for more there.
I honestly believe that the first trillionaire could just be someone who publishes a glute guide on how to grow. Because, like, that's the number one for people that struggle with when they first get started. It's just, if only someone were just to come up with a generalized plan that would work for that, because the amount of times that I hear glutes or just a lot of lower body too, it's one thing that, just is lacking a lot, but the nutrition in this sport too is something that is not talked about as much as it should be. What were some of the bigger nutritional changes that you made?
I would say that I've gone through some different phases with my nutrition. So when I first started competing and with my first few coaches, I was just tracking macros. And so really kind of, I mean, it was still mostly like whole clean foods. But then the coach I have currently, I've been with him for 2 years now, and he does more meal plan. And I actually, for me, found that super beneficial in that, like, through prep, I actually thought about food a lot less, right? Like, it was just like, oh, you don't even have to think about it. You know what's on the plan, and you're following that. Whereas when I was tracking macros, there was a lot more like, oh, well, what am I having for dinner? Let me fit this in, and it just made it a lot more straightforward to go with the meal plan.
Any tips for people on having to deal with cravings when they're on prep?
Ooh, that's a good one. So, I think that fruit, like if you are allowed, like fruit can be a really good thing. I've had some people do like BCAAs and like blend it with ice to make like a slushy. That can be like a really good low calorie. I think lemon water, like or tea, something that like is something else that has flavor, but maybe doesn't have the calories. There's actually one. Red Rose has a bunch of like teas that are sweetened with stevia, and those are really good for cravings.
I was gonna say, yeah, especially during summertime, just make popsicles out of some stuff, and
Yeah,
then you're
yeah.
really good to go. But yeah, that's like I told you before, and everyone knows this already, but like that's the thing that really brought me down. So, and I was down. Basically, for me, it would be like in a fight. It would probably be after taking about the second punch. I would probably be down everyone. So that was, again, I have zero experience in that, but just the mindset that you have to be a competitor is a lot of times it's type A. There are some type B people that I have on the show where I almost want to just have them on for 10 hours just so I can be like, how do you do this? Because that's not meant for, but in what other ways do you think that this mindset that you've developed for competing, because it is a very strict mindset, in what other ways has it helped other areas of your life?
I would say it's helped with like my business side. So I own a gym, and then I do personal training and like lifestyle coaching out of there. And I mean, when you have your hands in like different businesses like that, it really does take like a tight schedule and being super organized. And so I can kind of see that bleeding into to work for sure.
Yeah, a lot of it does translate, I think, to the business field, which is, again, something that we hear of quite a bit on here. But just even stepping on stage in a bikini, like, let's be completely honest, it's something that takes a lot of courage to do, no matter how good you look. Now, grant there are some people that look so good that you're just like, okay, I would have no worries at all. But then again, I mean, just human nature. Was that anything that you struggle with at all? Is just the fear of presenting yourself like that, or was it something where you're just like, I work my butt off, I don't really care?
So posing and being on stage was harder than almost anything else with prepping for me. So I had to literally, so like the last 3 years as I was working to get my pro card, I literally made myself get in my heels every single day. And it was still something that is, I'm just not naturally like flowy, and I don't wear heels outside of competing. And so it was a battle, and it was, for me, it was harder than the nutrition and the training by far.
What was the pro card journey like for you? Because some people that I talk to, like they get it in their first show. Other people, like you, it takes a few years. And then I've had other people where it takes like 20 years. And then it gets to a point where I just want to be honest with them and be like, if it takes you 20 years, like, come on. I say it jokingly, but it's so what was that journey like for you?
So it was kind of a long journey. So with the coach that I had in 2020, that was when I won my first like amateur show. And so then the following year in 2021, he's like, let's hit the national stage. And we were like, right coming up on all those national shows right in the spring and the summer. And he's like, you got this, you look great, you're gonna win. We go in and we get last place. And I was like crushed. I was like, oh my, like, how can he say that like I look so good? And so he's like, oh, it happens, like, let's do another one. And I was like, okay. So we did another one, same thing, last place. I was like, okay. And he's like, no, you just need like 2 more pounds. And so I was like, okay, this is the final shot, and then I'm done with this coach. So I went ahead and did the end of July USA's, with him, and same thing, like dead last in my class. So I'm like, okay, well, there just went a lot. So that's when I switched to the coach I have currently. And and the reason I picked him was because he was straightforward. Like I could tell from his post that he was blunt. He wasn't going to sugarcoat anything. He was going to give you a plan and expect you to follow it. And that's really what I needed at that point. And so started with him, and we went in, and um, I did two national shows my first year with him. We did one amateur. I won the overall with him, and then we went into two national shows where I ended up first call out. So I'm like, okay, we're getting closer. And so then after doing Universe in 2022, I ended up seventh. And so I was like, okay, we're going to take a full year. So we took a full year to build, and it came back to Universe. And that's where I ended up getting my pro card.
Well, without bad mouthing your previous coach, what were some of the other differences that your new coach put to you that take you from last place to getting your pro card?
I would say that I think the meal plan made a really big difference. Like, I think it just gave me more structure with my meals as opposed to the macros. So that was like one of the really big changes. The other thing is he had more detail for the bikini division. So he gave a lot more guidance on like hair and suit, and he required you to work with this posing coach, right? And so there was just a lot more on the fine details, whereas the other coach, he coached other divisions and wasn't as specific in bikini, and I think he just didn't have that eye.
And when it comes to the bikini division, you sort of have to have that flair, that pizzazz, that attitude that you don't really need to have in other divisions, especially when you're posing. Was that something that you were, because for me, I've always said you're either born with it or born without it. Was that something that you came easy for you, or something that you just had to will yourself into?
No, I definitely had to will myself into. I mean, I've never been one for like a lot of flair, and so it was something that I really had to work on.
I was gonna tell, like, I can usually tell if I talk to a bikini competitor within like 15 seconds if they're one of those where they're just born with that sassy peppiness where you're just like, well, I just want to tell them like, I hope you're not like this 24/7 and you're doing it just for the podcast and it's on stage. But yeah, it's definitely something that is it's rare because it's the only thing really for that division that, or not the only thing, but it's the big thing that I think differentiates from a lot of other divisions is just the sass and the attitude. Because like you don't see that with physique competitors, bodybuilders, or
Mhm.
figure competitors really. But has it gotten easier to step on that stage as you've done more and more shows, or is it still just as nerve wracking?
It's definitely gotten easier, and I think just as I've seen my physique progress and seeing, like, how much better we're getting, it does kind of help raise that confidence level, and, that confidence is something that even kinda comes with you off stage after seeing that on stage too.
And I love to talk post show blues on this show because people don't understand that aren't familiar with the sport. They always think that, oh, these people must look like that, 24/7 because they work so hard for it. And fortunately, that is not the case. And it's just, it was shocking for me too, even when I first had friends that I just was just flabbergasted by it. But what has your experience been like with it? And has it gotten easier for you again as your journey has gone on to sort of accept the fact that I'm not going to look this way 24/7? Or is it still just as hard as it was in the beginning?
It definitely is still hard. I think that because I've had some really successful off seasons and seen some really big improvements after cutting down the next time, I think it makes it a little bit easier. You really do kind of have to shift your focus onto something else though. Like you can't be like physique checking yourself all the time, like, and you have to kind of maybe change your wardrobe a little bit. It's just to make yourself feel more comfortable. Like some of the clothes that you wore during prep aren't going to fit the same as when you're in your building season. And so, like, having it be okay to, like, okay, let's train in a t-shirt so that we feel comfortable and can really focus on the strength instead of like every time you walk by the mirror, like, oh, what does my shoulder look like? Or what does my arms look like?
When you get that lean down, how hard is it for you to walk past a mirror without doing anything?
Oh, I think it's hard for anybody, right? But and part of it is like you're like, "Oh, am I still lean enough?" Like because you're like one trying to get ready for the stage. So it's hard, but um
Someone once
it's
gave me a house tour on this podcast, and they had a mirror in every single room just for that purpose. And I was just like, I couldn't do that because, like, that's. I was like, well, what do you do during the off season? And it's like, well, it's a reminder that I need to work on stuff and that I'm just improving myself. And I was like, that is just torture. I don't.
no.
Yeah. Well, speaking of torture, please don't tell me you're one of the people that tortures yourself like a lot of people I talk to, which makes this sport kind of sick to me. Do you ever watch the Food Network or anything like that when you're in prep? Because I've talked to some
No,
psychopaths that do that, and I just don't understand how that works.
that's not me. And even even like you have your Instagram and it shows you like what you most look at. Like mine has never been really filled with food. I That's never been my thing. I can't even watch the food channel anytime. It's really boring to me. So
I literally only watch it for those bake off shows, like if they do like season stuff, like Halloween stuff, where and that again, that is stuff like if I'm editing this or I'm at work and it's on the TV somewhere, then that's literally the only time I'm going to be watching. It's kind of like just nice filler time. But just when it comes to also the mentality that you need to have, it really does take away from a lot of other things that people would view in life. Like, this is a selfish sport, if we're being completely honest. Like, it's a very time consuming sport. How did you deal with the fact that you were going to probably have to focus on this a lot more? That's another thing that people, when they first get started, they focus on this a lot more than they intended to, or that they thought it was going to be.
yeah, I think each time I prep, I try to be more aware of like how much time I'm putting towards this and then just some of the relationships in terms of in other areas of my life, right? Because they do suffer whether you want them to or not. But I think whether you're aware, it's still gonna be an area that doesn't get as much attention as it does during the off season.
Yeah. And just the food aspect in and of itself, what is your go-to cheat meal?
Ooh, so there's kind of like two that I'll rotate between, and that's either like a really good steak or a burger.
I mean, that's 2 for 2 for me, basically. That's the same thing that I would do, really. But owning a gym, all the business stuff, how do you handle that while on prep brain? Because God forbid, I could never even imagine when I have that much brain fog running a business.
So I live by my calendar, and I also have gotten really good about like if I need to remember something, I'll text it to myself so that like everything is written down. Or like if a client tells me something, I'll tell them like, okay, you need to send that to me in Messenger so that I don't, so that it's kind of like backing myself up in a sense. But and also just kind of like time blocking things like, okay, we're not going to have as much time to kind of focus on the business right now. So you kind of doing as much as you can kind of to prep before and then being like, okay, this can wait until I'm done with my show, that type of thing.
Because there have been times that I've talked to people that are like a week or two out sometimes from the show. And I have told myself, like, if I asked for their social security number, they would probably give it to me. Like, that's how bad it gets, where you're just like, it's like, so yeah, anytime that someone has a business or does anything like that, it just fascinates me how they're able to pull through. But a lot of them do exactly what you're talking about, where it's, you have to be so regimented and just have everything down pat. But let's also be honest too, you're not the average looking woman. If you were to walk down the street, dress you the way you are right now, I consider it to be sort of like a mini celebrity, where you are just going to draw people's attention, because it's human nature when something's not of the normal to just kind of just be like, oh, hey, that's fascinating. What has that been like for you? And has it gotten easier for you to accept the fact that you are going to get, maybe a little bit more attention, especially as you get leaner?
Yeah, I would say that that's increased more like this last prep. And so it's kind of been something that, unless I wasn't noticing it before, but it's something that the last few months or going into this last show and winning my pro card, like you got a lot more looks at the airport than you did before. And that's kind of like you kind of just have to ignore it in a sense, but then also be ready for like people making a lot of comments that can kind of throw you off a little bit, or like, was that meant to be a compliment? Or were you trying to kind of be offensive? So,
What would you say is the best compliment you've ever received?
ooh, that's hard. I don't know if I could tell you like an exact one, but definitely in terms of like probably more so from people that like see me all the time, and saying like, "Oh my gosh, your glutes look so much different than last time." Like those type of compliments from people that see you more really are more meaningful than just some stranger on the street.
Yeah, exactly. I've talked to so many people, and they say most of the time it's from people that are also in the industry, or you can tell that have worked their butt off at this. And when they give you a compliment, it means quite a bit more than that. But yeah, it's something that is, I've always tried to ask that question too, because there is so much negative things that I hear, and just I like to try to bring a little bit more of a positive spin on it as well. But just the fact that you are able to, do all this and function again. I have to just point this out again. It's just, that's the one thing for me that like keeps me just flabbergasted by all these guests that I have on, where I'm just like, how are these people even functioning with all the stuff that they do? But again, it just goes to show you. But now we got to mention the C word here, cardio. I hate it more than life itself when it comes to cardio. And I mean, I go for walks and everything, but what is your relationship with cardio?
Yeah, it's not my favorite. I do it. I really so we try to make it a priority to walk our dogs every morning, and I actually do
Well, I got
like
to pause you right there. What kind of dogs do you have?
that. We have boxers. Yes,
Okay, well, I got
they're
to do.
quite
I no, hang on. I got to. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you though, because I have a boxer tangent story. So, my brother, my older brother, he's lives with a college roommate of his, and they have a place in, Minneapolis, and I go visit them probably like weekly, and they have the biggest boxer I've ever seen in my entire life. Like it is probably twice the size of normal, but like it is Great Dane size almost,
my gosh.
and its name is Odin, of course, and
Oh,
it's. So I'm 6'3", and that dog has knocked me over 3 times.
oh
That's how
my
big it
gosh.
is. Yeah. And what the thing is, it thinks it's a little dog, and it's like it's the friendliest dog I've ever met in my entire life. Like it is too friendly. And if I'm sitting on a chair, it'll try to like be a lap dog basically and try to like sit with me. But the thing, I have photos of it. I might have to send it to you. Where like I'm going like this trying to hold it basically. Then when it's like sitting on my lap, and it's just I've in the time it's knocking me over, I've been sitting in a chair, and then it sees me for the first time. Like if I'm outside, it gets so excited that it runs up to me and it pushes me over from the chair
Oh
and
my
then
gosh.
knocks me down. But it's and they just had a kid too, so I was always shocked too because I was telling him I was like, that dog might accidentally like murder that kid just because it gets so excited, and it's just like, but nothing's happened yet, so fingers crossed. And I got to knock on wood too because I don't want to be I don't want to get a text tomorrow saying, oh yeah, it happened, and I'm just like, oh my god, did I kill?
Oh no.
But yeah, so that's my boxer story because anytime anyone says a boxer, I have to mention that like that dog literally, like, we think it could have been the beast in the movie The Sandlot. Basically, it could have auditioned to become that. Basically, like that's how big it is. It's ridiculous.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
So
That's cool.
yeah, but being that you are a boxer owner too, how do you deal with that that happens all the time? Does that ever get used to that? Because whenever I'm over there at that place, like there's so much drool.
There's a lot of drool and they're very loud breathers, but I think that you kind of just get used to it. I mean, they're so lovable and funny that you kind of overlook those little things.
That's the thing, because like I was always raised with non-shedding dogs, so too whenever I go over to a place where they're shedding too, and you just like put on a blanket, and you're like, oh, half this blanket is their fur, basically. Where it's like, hey, I guess they did something. That was another huge thing for me. But I had to have a dog tangent on here, everyone, because I love dogs almost to a crazy degree. So anytime they get mentioned, I have to do that. But so yeah, with your cardio, I bet you take them on a lot of walks and stuff too, and at least that helps.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that helps. Other than that, a lot of my cardio is done on the Stairmaster though. That's kind of what my coach prefers. But if especially when it gets super high, like in the harder parts of prep, I'll sometimes split some of that up on the Stairmaster and the elliptical, especially if I'm super sore from like a leg day.
I take more pride in anything else in my entire life that I've never used a stairmaster. I always just do treadmill. Whenever someone says stair, it's because like you're just walking upstairs, and it's I understand it. I get it. Believe me, I don't have anything against it, but it's just I'd much rather be on a level playing field. And plus, on a treadmill, you can just raise it too and lower it if you want to. But again, that's I had a friend whose mom wasn't a competitor, but like she was in really good shape, and we would sleep over, and she'd wake up at like 6 a.m. and be on the stairmaster while we're still sleeping. By the way, downstairs in the basement. So that was my I think that kind of put an imprint on me where it's like stairmaster's bad in some way. So that kind of added that on. So that's one of the little things that happen to you where you're younger, where you're just like, hey, maybe that's the reason that I don't like it. Later on in life, but I mean, you've been doing this sport for years upon years, and this sport changes constantly. I mean, from the 5 years that I've been covering it, it is almost night and day to what the sport has become. I mean, you would the way that you look right now, you would be at least a figure competitor 5 years ago that I talked to. I mean, just that constant changing. But what have been some of the biggest changes that you yourself have seen in the sport alone since you first started?
I would say like muscle size for sure. And kind of what they're looking for with the glutes, right? Like they kind of went through a point where there was like more tie-in, and now they're trying to not soften it because these girls are definitely not soft, but just make it so it's not straight, quite so striated from the back. So and they you also see them kind of wanting different things from each competitor, and so that makes it a little tricky as well.
And this is a sport where, let's be honest, you're judged by other people. It's not, it's not like a automation thing like it is. There's human error that can sometimes evolve in it. And how do you deal with the mental side of just being judged by others? Because this is a rare sport and that happens. Now, I know for like any other professional league, the judges or the referees are all human, but it's kind of different here because you're just judged on the way that you look. How do you deal with that mental side of it where it's like, I'm not going to say it's not athletic because it is, but like it doesn't involve athletic feats to like really judge your thing. It just judged on the way that you look. So how do you deal with that? Because especially coming from someone that had an eating disorder background, I mean, judging yourself on the way you look, that's another thing when they talk about like, oh, I did a sport where that's like, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, it's funny because I don't really think about it that way all the time. I think because I think that it's like, especially with bikini, yes, it is how you look, but I think a lot of it has to do with how you present too. So sometimes when I don't do as well, it's almost more like, okay, well, what can I change to be better, even if it's not like a physique thing, right? Like, oh, do my extensions need to be longer? Or, do we need to adjust this, like take out this pose out of my routine? Because all those little things make a difference. And so I think because I know how important those are, and I've seen girls with lesser, not lesser physiques, but like maybe not look quite as good genetically as somebody else beat them just because of their presence on stage. So, yeah, I don't really think about it of like the judges like judging me on just how I look.
Well, the one thing that peeves me off is like what you just said, where like, oh, do I need to get different extensions? It's like no one should ever have to worry about that in a bodybuilding show. Like, oh, are my extensions good or something? It's like sometimes people do put a little bit more focus on the stuff that they shouldn't, and even judges too, where it's like, how does someone's hair impact? How would that impact their score? But I've heard instances where it does, where it's like, oh, the hair extension, and it's like, what is this, a hairstylist competition or something? Like, it's just those are some little things too, where and that impacts women so much more drastically than the men. No guys going like, my hair extensions were a little messy, so that might be not be why I won. So that's another thing too, where it just seems so much more unfair in the females on that type of side, where it's more focused, I think, on the beauty side of it. Not more focused, but it's definitely more than the guys are. So that's one thing that I wish that they would just realize. It's like, hey, if you wanted it to be a beauty pageant, call it a beauty pageant. Then it's like that's one thing that I've always dealt with myself. But when it comes to show day, what is your favorite thing about show day, and what is your least favorite thing about show day?
Ooh, favorite thing. So I really like I don't wear makeup a lot on a general basis, and so it's really fun for me to, have your makeup done and your hair done. My least favorite part is definitely like worrying about the tan and like not messing up the tan.
Well, I was gonna say, can you tell by my pale Norwegian skin how much tanner I would have to use? Good God! So that's another reason why. Look at how the sun's reflecting off my face like that. Like that doesn't. That's not a normal thing, everyone. And I go outside too. It's not like I'm just sheltered all the time. So it's yeah. Every time we have to talk about that tanner. But what was your first experience like? Them putting the tan on, because so many people, that was a very shocking moment. I'm not going to get into too much of the details, but like I was not aware that the circumstances around getting your first tan on at a show were like that. So what were you prepared ahead of time, or were you like some of the funnier guests I've had where they had no idea that was going to happen, and then that was their like, wait, what?
So fortunately, I was prepared because my coach, that my very first coach, the one that I was a nanny for, she was like, okay, this is how it's going to go. But I will say that after experiencing that, you really lose all sense of modesty. Like you're like, okay, we're just all out there now.
It is fascinating how it takes such a little amount to really have people lose that modesty, though, where you're just like, as soon as that happens, which I mean, it's a good thing then too, because you don't want to be like that person who's still like the 10th time doing it, and they're just like, oh my god, this is. But it's like, it's just fascinating how quickly that takes, because that is again a story that I've heard a lot of times from the compares that I've had on. But this is a question that I just recently came up with, which shows how good of a host I am. That it took me this long to come up with this question. But if there was a skill portion, so like if this was a beauty pageant, if there's a skilled portion of the show, what would be your talent?
Oh, hmm. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, like in terms of like,
Like singing, playing an instrument, doing anything, like any talent really.
ooh, so I have a very small hobby range that I mean, I did the piano growing up, but I wouldn't say that that's something that is really like a talent now. Um, I would say that I'm really strong in the gym, and I think some of that comes from my powerlifting background. So I mean, it would be kind of interesting to see like a competition where like you had like the strength side on like some of the lifts and the bodybuilding side. Like that would be really cool to see.
Well, the only problem is that you're so dieted down though that it's like you're not going to be max. So, are you one of those deceptively strong people? Even though you look like you're like like it's even more so because like I knew some people like that growing up where you're like you don't even look like you've ever touched a weight. Like there, it was worse than you because like you obviously look like you work out, but I know some people that like they have zero muscle tone at all, and next thing you know they're like you're like how are you doing this? Like
Yeah, yeah. I grew up on a cattle ranch,
that
so
explains it.
yeah. So there's a lot. I feel like a lot of my strength base kind of came from that growing up and really transferred over that. And I actually have been surprised by how well I've been able to keep my strength through my preps. Like I'm not someone who's seen like my weights drastically drop off.
Oh, aren't you so lucky? Why don't you just brag a little more, Bailey? But no, it's because yeah. But so I I've always told myself like never ask about like max lifts or anything like that. But since you brought it up, what are some max lifts that you're most proud of?
Hmm. So I have been able to hip thrust like 425 for like 5 reps. Um, and deadlift, when I was like powerlifting, I would get my max of over 300 for for the deadlifts. Squatting has never been my strong point though. I've never been quite as good at like barbell squats.
Same here. The squats have always been my enemy as well. And did you take any of the powerlifting training with you when you went back to bodybuilding? Because I've talked to about a dozen or so guests that was similar in your story, where they went to powerlifting and then they went to bodybuilding, or they did vice versa. Did you transition any of the training from powerlifting to bodybuilding?
I would say some of like the style a little bit, but I'm not going into that quite as low of a rep range, right? So like I tend to still start out with some of those compound lifts and then go into more of the hypertrophy, but definitely not getting down into that 3 rep range. Like I know some competitors still do that, but it's just I really feel a better pump and feel the muscle more if I'm going at least for 8 reps.
I've talked to some people that try to do maxes when they're like weeks out, and
No.
like my grandpa's always quoted this: there are a lot of stupid people in the world. He told me that when I was 6, and that still stands, to this day. So everyone, please don't try that. But one thing that I found fascinating about especially bodybuilders is that a lot of them don't really prefer that stage look as much as maybe a look of like 4 to 5 weeks out or maybe a few weeks out. Where do you fall on that? Because if I polled it, I would find that like probably like 2/3 of the guests that I talked to would say like I don't really prefer that stage look as much as like a few weeks out because you're maybe a little bit more fuller and you're not so just drained looking. But what is your preferred look?
Actually like 3 to 4 weeks after the show.
Okay.
So, like, because you're still, like, really pretty lean, but your muscles are, like, super full because you're getting so much more good food. Like, 6 weeks out from a show, like, I feel like you're still kind of, like, depleting, and so you just feel small. So I would say it's, like, 4 weeks after a show.
We have had a few, so like the last 3 podcasts, two of them have been that answer too. So it says, I mean, I honestly would agree with that as well, as long as you're not some of those people that like put on 40 pounds immediately after the show. Which did you ever struggle with that? Did you ever just go completely off the rails after one show? Because I feel like from the guests I've talked to, most people have maybe one show where that just accidentally happened.
I haven't had a show where I've, like, completely blown up after. And especially like the last few preps, I was actually like reversing into the show. So like by the time you got to show day, you almost weren't like even hungry to go like crazy after the show, which I think makes a huge difference in your reverse.
I honestly think though too it goes on to the coaching too as well. If you have a nice coach and a good coach, that really does help. But when it comes to coaching, because like you've had a good experience where you had a coach that didn't really work as well with you, and then you had a coach that did work. What to you makes a coach a good coach? Because so many people don't understand that there are more bad coaches than there are good coaches. Like if we're being completely honest, because especially in this day and age, everyone thinks that they're a coach. Everyone thinks that they can give you advice. But in your personal opinion, what makes a coach a good coach?
I think there are a lot of things. I think attention to detail is huge. Being responsive, like my new coach is like 24 hours and you got it like not more than 24 hours and you're going to get some feedback. And just being like super attentive and going to shows I think can be huge. Like my coach has been to multiple of my shows. Like he's had other athletes there too, but like just the fact that he's going to shows, he's staying current on the bikini division, right? Because like if you're not continually researching, like the sport does change, like you said. So they can't like be doing the same thing and that they were 5 years ago because that's not going to work now.
Absolutely. And it's really personalized too. Like some people might like a little bit more of a drill sergeant. Some people might want a little bit more of like a best friend kind of type. It really does depend on the person. But with Instagram, with social media, I think that's probably been some of the biggest changes for the sport is that you can like judge other people before they even step on that stage that you're competing against. You can always, see your competition and be aware of what they look like. Did that ever bother you at all? Did you ever get nervous? Because for me, that just how my mind works. If I saw the people that I was competing against and they might have even morphed a photo, they might have even posted the best angle possible, and then I'd be thinking to myself, I'd be like, okay, I need to find a different show or something like that. That's just how my mind works. But did you ever struggle with the fact that you can sort of not stalk these people, but you can be well aware of what they look like or have a good idea of it before the show?
Yeah, so there have been preps where I would like look up the show and try to see who was tagging it and who was going to be there. But I have found that the last couple times that it is so much more refreshing and you can really just focus more on you if you don't even go there, right? Like don't even look up the show and maybe even like don't scroll your social media. Like you can post stuff, but especially right before a show is just kind of a time to not be like digging for reasons why you're not going to do well almost and just focus on like what you can control and bringing the best that you can be.
Well, talking about, digging yourself holes and, just self sabotage, let's be completely honest, body dysmorphia is a huge thing that impacts a lot of competitors. It's still to this day is the funniest thing to me, and funny in a good way, just because these are some of the most in shape people on the planet, and to think that they struggle with this when you would think, again, this was my mindset when I was 18. Oh, if I get really jacked and I work out a lot, I'm never gonna feel bad about my body ever again. One of the dumbest quotes I've ever had in my entire life, if I would have known that back then. But how do you deal with that? Because once you start this sport, you're never good enough, you're never big enough, it's always self improving. How do you deal with that conundrum mentally?
So, I mean, there's still bad days, right? And so I think it's just a matter of keeping your focus on things that are important and going to help you in the future. So, like, okay, yes, we're not as lean, but how good are we feeling, right? Like we feel so much better. We have so much more energy. We can go do all these things with and build relationships that we maybe had put on the back burner. And so it's just enjoying what you can about this phase and not, I find that it really helps just not focusing on like how not lean you are or, or then on the opposite side, how much smaller you are, right? Because you're like, oh, I'm not keeping as much muscle when in reality, you're doing fine, but it's just a mental game.
And what were your friends and family's reaction like when you first broke to them that you wanted to compete and do this?
I think that I've always been kind of a strong-willed person and that they knew whatever I said I was going to do, I was going to do it. I think it's still something that not all my family members completely understand, and that's okay. And it's not something that we talk about a lot with some of them, and you just kind of set those boundaries and know that like, okay, this person might not be a part of this journey, but they can still be a part of your life in other ways.
Well, yeah, and it's not for everyone too. I mean, everyone shouldn't be a bodybuilder. Everyone shouldn't be obese. Everyone should. I mean, it's other people's point. I mean, you got to pick your poison with a lot of these types of things, and just this whole sport. If you were to talk to someone and someone were to tell you like, "Hey, you can choose one thing about this sport, and everyone would go along with it. If you could change one thing, what would it be?"
Ooh, hmm. That's really hard. Do you mean like in terms of like the judging criteria
Anything
or
about the sport, like if you wanted to, yeah, like anything, you can do judging, you can do the pay, which is an obvious answer. So I really don't even like include that one because duh, it's like everyone would want the pay thing. But like you could do, yeah, really anything, really.
hmm. I don't know what I would change about the sport. I think that they're doing a really good job of kind of like having more seminars and kind of trying to get more people together with it. Um, yeah, I don't know if there's anything that I can think of right off the top of my head that I would really want to.
I would ban the people that compete in one show and then call themselves a personal trainer and call themselves an expert. If we could
Okay,
just
that's
if we could just find those people and hunt them down and
fair.
not murder them, everyone, but just, shake them down a little bit and be like, hey, don't do that anymore, because the amount of times that I see that, and I've had former guests that do that stuff, and I'm just like, why are you doing this? Because like, you've been in like one or two shows, you're not an expert on it, you're not. And then I've talked to them, it's like, you have so many problems with your own journey, like what the effort? So that's one thing for me too, where I see that too many times, or the people that are just like, do my program and you end up looking just like me, and it's like, dude, you have gills coming out of your neck from some of the stuff that you take, so it's like, just don't be that person too, where it's just, yeah, don't ever say that you can look just like me from doing something, unless you're actually, gonna promote it yourself. But that's just another thing for me too as well. But when we talk also about just the future and what it has in store for you, when we have you on a year from now, and I'd like to talk to you again in a year to see what you've been up to, and what are your plans? What would you like to be at next year when we talk to you? What are some goals that you have?
So we are going into an improvement season. So next year, the plan is to do kind of do some pro shows and kind of see if we've made enough improvements and kind of how we stack up. Obviously, the goal would be to qualify for the Olympia at some point, but short term, I think just getting first call outs, trying to get top five, and kind of working my way up the ranks, because I know that I'm not someone who is that like first time gonna crush it, right? Like I'm gonna have to move my way up the ranks, and I realize that, and it's just gonna be a lot of hard work, but I enjoy the journey, so it'll be worth it.
Well, and now lastly, I got to ask about the tattoos, because I've seen some on your finger and then on your forearm. Do they have any special stories or meanings to them? Because I've always been fascinated by tattoos myself.
Yes, they do. So this one on my wrist,
Mhm.
it says Kia Kaha, and that means forever strong. So this one I actually got in relation to my eating disorder. It was me and my friends had written Kia Kaha on our arm, and we put our arm in to the photo and just got a photo of our arms. And looking back at that photo a couple months later, I could just see like my arm was just like skin and bones. And so I told myself that once I got to a place where I was better, I would get that tattooed on my arm. So that's
What language is that?
I think it's like a tribal
Oh, okay.
type language, yeah. And then I have a tattoo on the back of my calf, which is my sister tattoo. And so me and my sister got those for our birthdays, and that one says she is strong. And then on the top of my foot, I have one that says believe. And the one on my finger is the last one, and I just got it because I liked how it looked.
The only tattoo that I would ever get is if I ever decide to become a bachelor, and I would just try to get like a gold wedding ring one on my ring finger, just see if people ever fell for it. Just when I'd be out, that's the only. I mean, I fascinated by tattoos. I love them, but yeah, I don't know if I'd get one for my, just because for the only thing for me is that, like, with guys, you can't really get like a tattoo on your calf. You can't really get a tattoo on your foot. You gotta make a statement with that. So that's the only real, issue there. But lastly, do you ever look at the photos of when you were maybe in the eating disorder phase and look at your photos now, and just how do you deal with the mental process of realizing just how far you've come, because you have made such a drastic journey?
Yeah, I mean it's huge, and I like when you look at those photos physically, like that's not how I saw myself when I was there, right? Like, and so to look back now and just see like where we are today, it shows that it is it's a long journey, but because I was there, like mentally, I know exactly how I felt when I was there, right? And so to look back and see that like, man, I was really struggling and really hurting, and then to be where we're at now, I'm grateful, right? Like not everybody gets the chance to heal like that.
And if anyone out there who's listening is going through something similar, what would be the best piece of advice that you would give them?
Find somebody you trust that can help you through it, and don't be afraid to talk to them, because I think that until you find that person that you feel completely comfortable to help pull you out of it, it's not something, or it's really hard to do on your own.
I'll just add on and also realize that talking to someone and talking about your problems is not a weakness. It's not admitting failure. It's not a cowardly thing to do, which is, this is just coming from the male perspective, where a lot of it we just feel
Yeah.
like if we discuss that, it's just, you're just a coward and stuff. So just realize that asking for help can be one of the strongest things you can ever do in your life, because that's, and admitting that you need help too is a huge one too. But again, Bailey, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing your journey with us. It was just an absolute delight to talk to you, and can't wait to see where you're at. Everyone, go and give her a follow on our Instagram page. I'll leave a link down below. And Bailey, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, this is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot, signing off. Have a great day, everyone.